The unit, known in certain circles by the codename Ghost 6, was no ordinary mercenary outfit. Their reputation, forged in the crucible of scores of undisclosed operations spanning the globe, was surgical. They were surgeons of the shadow world, capable of performing the most complex procedures with minimal intrusion and maximum efficiency, leaving no trace beyond what the client strictly required. Each team member was a finely honed instrument, a master specialist in their field. Yet their true strength lay in synergy, an almost intuitive understanding born from years working together under conditions where a single mistake meant instantaneous, final death. The team leader, Alpha, was the strategist and commander, his authority built not on rank, but on impeccable tactical acumen and the ability to make the right calls under the crushing pressure of time and fire. Bravo, the heavy weapons and close quarters battle specialist, moved with a grace unexpected for his build, his calm demeanor in the face of danger serving as an anchor for the entire group. Charlie, the tech wizard, could breach any digital fortress, bypass any security system. His fingers dancing over the keyboard of a ruggedized tablet were as deadly as Bravo's bullets. Delta, the demolitions and heavy ordnance expert, possessed an almost preternatural ability to calculate the perfect charge for any target, from an armored door to a building's load-bearing structure. His recent calculation for breaching a fortified bunker in Central Africa had been deemed exemplary even by skeptical analysts from the client's side. Echo, the field medic, could work miracles with minimal gear under a hurricane of fire, his cool head and rapid response time having pulled operators back from the brink countless times. A recent simulation involving casualty evacuation under heavy enemy fire showcased his ability to stabilize critical injuries in a record 70 seconds. And finally, Foxtrot, the scout and silent infiltration specialist, whose ability to melt into shadows and neutralize hostiles without a sound had become legend. His last operation on an oil platform in the South China Sea, where he single-handedly eliminated 6 sentries in 4 minutes, using only a knife and his knowledge of vulnerable points, was yet another confirmation of his mastery. Their cohesion was absolute, their trust unbreakable. The signal arrived without warning, flashing onto Alpha's secure communications device. It wasn't a simple text message. Contract activation from their handler, known only as the Handler, was always a complex security ritual. A multi-layered authentication system required sequential input of dynamic codes, voice verification via a shifting algorithm, and finally, a biometric retinal scan from Alpha using the device's specialized module. Only after successfully navigating all stages did the message appear on screen. The handler's tone, as always, was dry, businesslike, devoid of any emotion or personal touch. The information was no concise, yet sufficient to initiate. Target Dr. Elias Thorne, a European geneticist of dubious renown, declared rogue and evading international justice. Location: an isolated research complex situated in a remote mountainous region of an unnamed Southeast Asian country. Objective: extract or eliminate Thorne and acquire or destroy all data related to his current work. Alpha immediately activated the assembly protocol. Within 90 minutes, all 6 operators were convened at their clandestine base, a nondescript logistics warehouse on the outskirts of a major port city somewhere in California, its walls concealing an ultra-modern command center and armory. The holographic display in the center of the room flickered to life, showing sparse satellite imagery of the suspected target location. The images were blurry due to the complex mountain terrain and, potentially, the presence of active camouflage shielding. Alongside the images played fragments of intercepted radio chatter from the target area. Heavily encrypted signals, but Charlie's preliminary analysis pointed to a high-tech source, atypical for the region. Alpha relayed the official cover story provided by the handler. Thorn, operating under the guise of a private corporation, was developing next-generation biological weapons, protected by well-equipped mercenaries. The story sounded plausible, but Alpha's gut told him it was merely the tip of the iceberg. He laid out the contract terms clearly, emotionlessly, meeting the eyes of each team member. Full operational autonomy, no external support after the insertion point. High probability of encountering unknown hostile forces, not just mercenaries, but potentially state actors of the host country. Potential violation of international law if their presence was detected. The reward was commensurate, an astronomical sum in cryptocurrency, transferred to anonymous offshore accounts, enough for each of them to vanish without a trace, ensuring a comfortable existence for the rest of their days. They discussed potential complications. Political fallout if the operation failed and anyone was captured. The complete lack of alternative extraction routes besides the single one they would plan themselves. The risk was immense, but risk was their trade. Charlie pulled up the psychological profile of Dr. Thorn, pieced together from scraps of intelligence. A genius with a clear God complex, expelled from leading European scientific institutions for conducting unethical experiments that pushed beyond acceptable boundaries. Paranoid, obsessed with controlling life and death, possibly seeking revenge against the scientific community that had rejected his brilliance. His ultimate goal, Charlie speculated, might not be merely a weapon, but the creation of some kind of perfect being designed to shift the global balance of power. The question why never arose. The team only discussed how. No vote was needed. Their agreement was silent, built on mutual understanding and acceptance of the risks. Alpha looked at each operator, seeing in their eyes the same resolve he felt himself. He activated the transmitter and sent a short encrypted message to the handler. Contract accepted. Commencing planning. There was no turning back now. Alpha immediately assigned tasks. Charlie was to dive deep into analyzing all available data, searching for vulnerabilities in the target's presumed defenses, any digital footprint left by Thorn or his activities. Delta would calculate the necessary quantity and types of explosives for various breach scenarios, from quiet entry to blasting through reinforced structures. Echo would prepare an expanded medical kit, anticipating encounters with unknown adversaries and the possibility of atypical injuries. Foxtrot was to meticulously study the proposed infiltration and exfiltration routes, developing contingency plans. Bravo would conduct a full check and preparation of assault gear, weapons, and ammunition. The work began. Selecting gear for an operation of this caliber was a methodical and critical process. Every ounce of weight, every piece of equipment had to justify its existence through function and reliability. For their primary weapons, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and Foxtrot settled on Heckler & Koch HK 416 carbines and the latest Sig Sauer MCX Spear rifles, both chambered in .300 blackout. This choice was driven by several factors. The .300 blackout round offered superior stopping power at the short to medium ranges typical of close quarters battle, CQB, and was ideally suited for suppressors, minimizing the weapon's sound signature, critical for the initial infiltration phase. Sidearms were chosen from the time-tested Glock 19 and the more exotic but potent FN-57, also fitted with suppressors. Bravo, as the breacher and CQB specialist, additionally carried a Benelli M4 Super 90 semi-automatic shotgun loaded with a versatile range of shells. Buckshot for maximum stopping power against unarmored targets at close range, slugs for breaching light barriers, less lethal rounds if necessary, and flashbang shells for disorienting the enemy. Delta, tasked with providing fire support and handling explosives, opted for the lightweight FN Evolus machine gun in 5.56 mm for its mobility and rate of fire, complemented by a compact M320 grenade launcher module, GLM, for engaging enemy cover and concentrations. As backup weapons and tools, each operator carried a proven combat knife, be it a classic K-bar or a modern Strider, along with a Leatherman or Gerber multi-tool. Technological superiority was one of Ghost 6's key advantages. Each operator was equipped with the latest helmet-mounted system, analogous to the military's IVAS, integrating cutting-edge night vision and thermal imagers. These systems featured fusion capability, overlaying thermal imagery onto the night vision picture to create a clear, information-rich view even in complete darkness or heavy smoke. The helmet's tactical display projected key information. Friendly positions on a 3D terrain map, feeds from reconnaissance drones, and target designations from Alpha. An integrated bone conduction comms system provided clear, discrete communication within the team without blocking ambient sounds. For scouting rooms and inaccessible areas, they utilized miniature Black Hornet 3 drones, roughly the size of a small bird, capable of transmitting real-time video feeds. Additionally, the team carried portable motion sensors and heartbeat detectors, though the latter had limited range and could be foiled by certain types of shielding. Charlie, beyond the standard kit, carried a ruggedized tactical tablet loaded with specialized software for hacking networks, analyzing data, controlling drones and electronic warfare, along with a toolkit for physical breaching, including a compact laser cutter and hydraulic spreaders. Body armor was chosen based on the principle of reasonable sufficiency. Lightweight Class the 3A plus soft armor vests providing protection against pistol rounds and fragmentation, with the ability to quickly add supplementary Class 4 ceramic plates for rifle protection should the situation escalate to open combat. Additional fragmentation modules protected the neck, shoulders, and groin. For Delta, carrying the machine gun and significant ammunition load, lightweight exoskeleton support was provided to reduce strain on his back and legs during extended movement. Medical readiness was paramount. Each operator carried an individual first aid kit, IFAK, secured in an easily accessible location, containing CAT tourniquets for arterial bleeds, modern hemostatic agents like QuickClot for wound packing, potent painkillers like fentanyl lozenges or morphine auto-injectors and stimulants, adrenaline ampules and modafinil tablets for shock or critical fatigue. Echo, as the team medic, carried an expanded medical pack weighing around 30 pounds, containing a portable defibrillator, a surgical kit for emergency field interventions, reserves of plasma and blood substitutes, broad-spectrum antibiotics, and a selection of antidotes for known chemical warfare agents, just in case. Alpha detailed the operation plan. Infiltration would commence with a halo, high-altitude, low opening, jump from an unmarked C-130 transport flying above 30,000 feet over international waters. The jump would be executed using oxygen equipment under complete radio silence, with parachutes deployed at the lowest possible altitude to evade radar detection. The landing zone, LZ, was approximately 15 miles from the target complex's suspected location. This would be followed by a multi-hour forced march through difficult mountainous and forested terrain, conducted at night using NVGs and special thermo-optic camouflage cloaks designed to distort the wearer's silhouette and thermal signature. Upon approaching the target area, Foxtrot and Echo would establish a forward observation post, OP, on a dominant height and maintain continuous surveillance of the facility for 24 hours, gathering intel on guard routines, surveillance systems, and potential vulnerabilities. The main assault element, led by Alpha, prepared 3 penetration options. Plan A, stealth entry, utilizing Foxtrot's skills and Charlie's tools to bypass security systems. Plan B, a dynamic breach using Delta's explosives if detected, or if stealth entry proved impossible. Plan C, exploiting alternative routes like ventilation shafts or service tunnels, should reconnaissance reveal them. In the remnants of the warehouse space, converted into a training range, the team spent hours drilling CQB tactics in limited visibility and confined spaces. A mock-up of the complex, constructed from the sparse satellite data and Charlie's educated guesses, allowed them to rehearse the primary assault elements. The operators refined their coordination, using standardized hand signals and brief code phrases transmitted over the tactical network. Special focus was placed on scenarios like contact with unknown enemy, man down, and emergency casualty evacuation under fire. Meanwhile, Charlie waged his own war in the digital realm. He relentlessly sifted through terabytes of data, searching for any digital breadcrumbs left by Thorn or his mysterious lab. He managed to uncover several encrypted financial transactions routed through a chain of shell corporations and offshore banks, linked to procurements of specific scientific equipment, latest generation DNA sequencers, high-capacity centrifuges, vivarium life support systems, as well as advanced Israeli and American-made security hardware. But the most disturbing find was a mention of a project codenamed Cerberus in data fragments allegedly leaked from a classified European Union scientific network several years prior. According to these fragmented reports, Project Cerberus, involving experiments in hybridizing the genes of large predators, specifically mentioning Canis lupus, the wolf, was abruptly shut down and classified due to unforeseen and extremely dangerous side effects manifesting in late-stage experiments. Details were scarce, but the phrasing alone was enough to make one's blood run cold. The final hours before departure were dedicated to final checks of weapons, gear, and communication systems. The intelligence gathered by Charlie, including the latest satellite images and radio intercept analysis, was uploaded to the operator's tactical tablets and helmet displays. Alpha conducted the final briefing, reiterating the rules of engagement, ROE, established for this mission. Minimal use of lethal force against security personnel until hostile intent was confirmed. Mission priorities: 1. Capture or eliminate Thorn. 2. Secure or destroy project data. 3. Neutralize any immediate threat. 4. Successful exfiltration of the team. He scanned the faces of his operators, focused, tense, but ready. Remember, out there we only have each other. There's no backup coming. We work clean, fast, effective, execute the mission whatever the cost. The psychological prep was complete. The surgeons were ready for the operation. The flight proceeded in complete silence, broken only by the monotonous drone of the unmarked C-130's engines as it soared above 30,000 feet over the dark, indifferent waters of the ocean. They were approaching the Southeast Asian coast from a direction where air defenses were known to be thinnest. The night was moonless, clouds obscuring the stars. In the cargo bay, bathed in the dim red glow of emergency lights, 6 figures in full combat gear performed final equipment checks. Oxygen masks were sealed tight against their faces. Altimeter readings on their wrists glowed with a steady green light. Alpha raised his hand, then brought it down sharply. The signal. The ramp slowly lowered, revealing a roaring black void. One after another, at 2-second intervals, the members of Ghost 6 stepped out of the aircraft into the freezing, rarefied air of the stratosphere. The sensation of a halo jump was always a mixture of adrenaline-fueled exhilaration and chilling terror. The first few seconds of free fall in near silence, feeling like a grain of sand cast into infinity. Then the rising roar of the wind, the cold biting through layers of clothing. Terminal velocity reached 120 miles per hour. The operators controlled their body positions, navigating by instruments and the barely visible lights far below. At 5,000 feet, Alpha gave the command to deploy. A short, sharp jerk, the crack of the canopy overhead, and the plummeting descent transitioned into a smooth glide. They flew under ram air parachutes, maneuvering to regroup and land in the designated zone. A small clearing surrounded by dense jungle, 15 miles from the objective. The landing was hard but executed with practiced precision. Quick gear check, jettison, and conceal the parachutes. Within 5 minutes of touchdown, the team was assembled and ready to move. Radio silence was maintained. Movement through the rugged terrain began immediately. Foxtrot took point, his silhouette barely discernible in night vision, melting into the interplay of light and shadow beneath the dense jungle canopy. The others followed in a tactical column, maintaining dispersion, constantly scanning their sectors. The silence of the tropical night was almost absolute, broken only by their own muffled breathing, the rustle of gear, and the occasional crunch of a dry twig under a heavy boot. The air was humid and warm, thick with the scents of decaying leaves, damp earth, and unfamiliar blossoms. Gradually, the dense, suffocating jungle began to give way to rocky foothills. The ascent steepened. Vegetation thinned. A cold mist rolled in from the valley below, clinging to rocks and tree trunks, further reducing visibility. Sharp, gusting winds cut to the bone. The feeling of complete isolation from the rest of the world intensified with every step. Here, far from civilization, nature felt not just wild, but hostile. Foxtrot discovered the first anomalies. Moving point, he spotted tracks in the damp earth. Huge, deep paw prints with long claw marks, belonging to no known local predator. The size was astonishing, as if an enormous grizzly bear had passed through, yet the shape was distinctly canine. Foxtrot relayed the info to Alpha via secure comms using a short, coded burst. Unease grew. Half a mile further, he encountered a trap. Not a primitive snare or pitfall, but a high-tech device. A motion and pressure sensor disguised as a rock, clearly professionally installed. But the sensor had been disabled. Its metal casing was crushed like a tin can, wires torn. Nearby were signs of a struggle and several more of the same massive paw prints. Further along the route, they found several more similar devices. Some were operational, others destroyed with the same brutal, inhuman force. Who or what could have done this, and why? Finally, after nearly 8 hours of grueling march, the team reached the observation post site. It was a rocky ledge concealed by dense brush, overlooking the valley where, according to intel, Thorne's complex was located. Echo and Foxtrot quickly established the position, deploying camouflage netting that mimicked the color and texture of the surrounding rock face, and setting up portable seismic and acoustic sensors around the perimeter. Foxtrot set up his Barrett MRAD sniper rifle with its powerful optic and thermal sight, while Echo arranged his medical gear and took up an observation position. Charlie launched a Black Hornet mini-drone, which rose silently into the air and headed towards the target. The image transmitted by the drone to the team's tactical tablets was clear, despite the 1.5-mile distance. The entrance to the complex was a massive armored door built directly into the rock face, skillfully camouflaged to blend with the natural terrain. The perimeter around the entrance was pristine. No signs of patrols, guard posts, or movement. The drone's thermal imager showed minimal heat signatures from within the complex itself. Faint, barely perceptible warmth from operating equipment, perhaps generators or life support. But there were no signs of movement from people or other warm-blooded creatures. External surveillance cameras, which should have covered the approaches, were either smashed, pointing uselessly at the ground, or simply offline, their lenses dark and cold. A tense silence fell over the team comms. Where was Thorne's vaunted mercenary security force? Alpha and Charlie quickly analyzed the data from the drone and the observers on the ledge. The absence of visible security was a very bad sign. It could only mean one of two things. Either the guards had, for some reason, abandoned the facility shortly before their arrival, or something had happened to them. Something that had also disabled the external surveillance systems and the traps on the approaches. Plan A, stealth infiltration, now became not just preferable, but the only viable course of action to understand what was happening inside. Alpha ordered the main element himself, Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, to move towards the objective. Echo and Foxtrot would remain at the OP, providing overwatch and intelligence gathering, with orders to rejoin the main group later on signal, or if comms were lost for more than 30 minutes. The 4 operators began a cautious descent down the steep slope towards the base of the cliff where the entrance lay. The tension was almost palpable. The surrounding silence felt unnatural, oppressive. As they neared the armored door, they began to pick up a faint but distinct odor, seeming to emanate from the rock itself. A strange, unsettling mix of ozone, like after a thunderstorm or near powerful electrical equipment. The sharp tang of antiseptics and something else. Heavy, stale, nauseatingly organic. The stench of slaughter. They reached the massive steel door. It was closed. The massive armored door, set into the rock, looked impregnable. No external locks, handles, or visible mechanisms. Just a smooth steel surface blending with the stone. Charlie got to work. He attached a portable scanner to the door, which began analyzing the metal structure, searching for hidden interface ports or vulnerabilities in the locking system. After a minute, the scanner beeped, having located a small, expertly concealed access port. Charlie connected his ruggedized tablet and attempted an electronic breach. His fingers flew across the touchscreen, cycling through algorithms, launching decryption scripts. But the system was unresponsive. De-energized, damaged, or using an unknown protocol, he reported succinctly over the internal comms. Moving to Plan B, Delta, standing ready nearby, had already prepped a compact plasma torch. Covered by Alpha and Bravo, who held security towards the valley and along the cliff face, Charlie marked the cutting points, the suspected locations of the heavy internal locking bolts. He donned protective goggles and activated the torch. A bright, blinding arc of plasma struck the steel with a hiss and crackle. The smell of burning metal filled the air. The work required surgical precision and patience. Sparks flew, illuminating the tense faces of the operators. 1 minute, 2, 3. Charlie methodically burned through the steel at 4 points. Finally, a dull grinding sound echoed. The bolts yielded. Bravo put his shoulder to the massive door. With a low groan, protesting on rusted hinges, it slowly swung inward, revealing an entrance into absolute darkness. The team flowed inside, instantly shifting into a tactical diamond formation for room clearing. The first thing that hit them with almost physical force was the suffocating, nauseating blend of odors. A sharp chemical smell like formaldehyde or some powerful disinfectant mingled with the heavy metallic tang of blood, both fresh, still wet, and old, dried, soaked into the surfaces. And dominating it all was a repulsive, feral, animalistic stench, the smell of unwashed fur, excrement, and rotting flesh. The corridor they entered was dimly lit by sparse emergency lights on the ceiling, flickering at irregular intervals, snatching fragments of the walls and floor from the darkness. A profound, oppressive silence reigned, broken only by their own accelerated breathing transmitted through their headset mics, and a distant, low hum, like the sound of a ventilation system somewhere deep within the complex. Moving forward slowly and cautiously, expanding their controlled zone step by step, they encountered the first evidence of the horror that had unfolded here. Bodies. Dozens of bodies in modern tactical gear, armed with AK-12S and AR-15 style assault rifles. This was Thorne's security detail, the mercenaries the handler had mentioned, but they were dead. And they hadn't been killed in a firefight. The scene was monstrous. The Ghost 6 operators had seen death in many forms, but never like this. The bodies were literally torn apart. Huge, ragged wounds gaped on torsos and limbs, marked by giant claw marks that had punched through Kevlar vests and trauma plates, as if they were cardboard. Helmets were breached, revealing crushed skulls. Bones were snapped at unnatural angles. Some bodies were partially devoured, limbs ripped off and tossed aside. Blood was everywhere. Dark brown and bright red stains smeared on the walls, the ceiling, the floor, pooling around the remains of equipment lining the corridor. It formed grotesque patterns, testifying to the incredible fury and power of the attackers. Alpha ordered them to hold perimeter. Echo, who had rejoined the main group after confirming the external perimeter clear and the observers en route, immediately began a quick examination of several bodies, careful not to disturb the scene excessively. His verdict, relayed over the internal net, was brief and emotionless, but no less terrifying for it. Alpha Echo. Injuries inconsistent with any known small arms or edged weapons. Also inconsistent with attacks by known large predators. Force trauma is colossal. Tooth and claw marks present. Resemble large canids, but the scale, off the charts. Time of death varies, few hours to maybe 30 minutes ago for some. Numerous 7.62 and 5.56 casings on the floor from the guards' weapons. No sign of return fire from the attackers. Looks like a one-sided slaughter. The realization hit Alpha like a physical blow. The enemy wasn't human. The handler's cover story about militants was either deliberate deception, or he himself hadn't known the whole truth. But it didn't matter now. Reality was here, laid out before them in mangled corpses and the stench of death. He immediately issued a new directive over the tactical net. All elements, listen up. Adversary identified as unknown biological entity, aggressive, extremely powerful. Classification, predator. Move in pairs, interlocking fields of fire. On contact, use fragmentation and flashbangs to disorient before engaging. Aim for head and central nervous system. Controlled fire only, single shots or short bursts. Conserve ammunition. Charlie, your priority is finding any data on the nature of this enemy, vulnerabilities, origins. Execute. Advancing deeper into the complex along the main corridor, the team began noticing other disturbing details confirming Echo's assessment. Deep claw gouges scarred the steel doors of side rooms. Thick steel bars covering ventilation grates near the ceiling were bent outward or ripped entirely from the concrete walls. Surviving security cameras were smashed, the impacts clearly originating from within the corridor. On one blood-splattered guard terminal, the screen still glowed, displaying a final, fragmented message. Security system alert. Multiple containment breaches. Sector Gamma. They're loose. Request immediate backup. The tension within the group ratcheted up with every second. The oppressive silence now felt deceptive, malevolent. It was punctuated only by the distant scrape of metal on concrete from somewhere deeper within. The monotonous drip of liquid, water from a damaged pipe, or blood from the ceiling. And a strange, unsettling clicking sound that echoed from a ventilation shaft directly above Bravo's head. The flickering emergency lights created a play of light and shadow where peripheral vision constantly conjured illusory shapes, causing operators to flinch and raise their weapons. The psychological pressure was becoming immense. They were consummate professionals, prepared for any human adversary. But what they faced here was beyond their experience, beyond anything known. It was primal terror made flesh, and it was clearly the master of this concrete labyrinth of death. The team pressed deeper into the complex methodically, clearing sector by sector, room by room. Their movements were honed by years of training. Entry in pairs, check corners, cover sectors, report clear. But what they found only intensified the oppressive sense of unreality. The guards' living quarters were empty, but everywhere bore signs of hasty flight. Overturned furniture, abandoned personal effects, and blood spatters on walls and floors, evidence of short, brutal struggles. The armory had been breached, its massive steel door ripped from its hinges by sheer force. Some weapons were missing from the racks. Others lay scattered on the floor amidst empty ammunition crates. The medical bay, adjacent to the living quarters, was a scene of utter devastation. Medical equipment lay smashed, the operating table overturned, the floor littered with used syringes, empty ampules of stimulants and painkillers, and blood-soaked bandages. The smell of blood and antiseptic was overpowering here. Every step through the corridors of this damned place confirmed Echo's initial theory of a sudden, incredibly violent assault originating from within the complex itself. Finally, they reached the laboratory blocks, presumably the heart of Thorne's research center. The contrast between the ultra-modern, sterile-looking equipment and the reigning chaos was stark. The labs were state-of-the-art. Rows of humming DNA sequencers, gleaming stainless steel centrifuges, complex vivarium life support systems, robotic manipulators. But all this existed alongside horrific evidence of the experiments and the subsequent slaughter. Huge cages, constructed from thick steel and bulletproof plexiglass, lined the walls. Most were empty, but scraps of coarse dark fur, bone fragments, and dried slime littered the floors. Several cages had been broken out from the inside, thick steel bars bent and torn with incredible force. A few operating tables, equipped with wide leather restraints, were soaked in blood and coated with remnants of unknown biomatter. Smashed beakers and containers revealed murky liquids containing floating tissue fragments. The stench here became almost unbearable. The familiar mix of blood, antiseptic, and animalistic musk now blended with the heavy Swedish odor of decay and chemical reagents. Charlie, finding one lab where the server equipment seemed relatively intact, immediately jacked in. The main data arrays were either wiped or encrypted with a key he didn't possess, but he managed to access backup logs and system journals. What he began extracting confirmed their worst fears. Fragments of experiment logs contained direct references to Project Cerberus. The project's goal was the successful hybridization of Canis lupus, wolf, and select Canis familiaris breeds, primarily fighting types, with the human genome to create subjects with enhanced physical attributes and combat instincts. Subsequent entries detailed the results. Uncontrollable aggression surges in late-series subjects, progressive genomic instability leading to physical mutations, significant acceleration of metabolism and regenerative capabilities, recorded instances of control loss over alpha group subjects even under heavy sedation. One of the last accessible files mentioned a subjugation serum V3.7, developed to control the creatures, but noted its low efficacy in late-stage hybrids. The picture sharpened with horrifying clarity. Thorne wasn't just developing a bioweapon. He was breeding an army of monsters. And by all appearances, he had lost control of them. In an adjacent room, apparently some kind of morgue or biostorage facility, awaited another gruesome discovery. Several large glass tanks filled with a murky yellowish fluid, likely formaldehyde. Floating inside were grotesque malformed creatures, clearly early failed results of Thorne's experiments. Disproportionate bodies, extra or underdeveloped limbs, bisected skulls revealing exposed brains, faces frozen in perpetual agony on half-human, half-bestial visages. It was a graphic testament to the insane and ruthless nature of the research conducted within these walls. Elements of body horror that sent a chill down the spines of even the battle-hardened Ghost 6 operators. Suddenly, the motion sensors Charlie had placed at the entrance to the sector triggered, indicating rapid movement back in the corridor they had just cleared. Instantly, the team snapped into defensive positions, covering the doorway. From the corridor came the heavy thudding of multiple paws, the scrape of claws on the metal floor. The sounds grew closer, louder, The operators held their breath, ready to fire. Then, as abruptly as they began, the sounds ceased. Charlie checked the sensors. Clear. False alarm. Equipment malfunction. Or was the enemy studying them, testing their reactions? The tension stretched to the breaking point. The silence returned, heavy with unspoken menace. Just then, Foxtrot, still en route with Echo to rejoin the main group, reported over the radio. Alpha, observing movement in the ventilation shafts above your current position. Multiple contacts, thermal signatures consistent with predators. They were not alone. The creatures were close, possibly right above their heads. The team's morale began to fray. Professional discipline and adrenaline still held them together. But the constant tension, the horrifying discoveries, the unbearable stench, and the dawning realization of the enemy they faced were taking their toll. The operators felt not only fatigue but a growing sense of revulsion mixed with a creeping, irrational fear of the unknown. Bravo, normally the most stoic and silent member, muttered a curse under his breath upon seeing another mangled guard. Echo, checking the stimulant supply in his medkit, caught himself wondering if it would be enough. Only Alpha maintained an outward calm, reinforcing discipline over the radio with short, clipped commands. Stay focused. Stick to the plan. Objective is Thorn and his data. Find him, get the intel, and get out of this hellhole. No distractions. Pushing deeper through the corridors, guided by schematics Charlie had recovered from a terminal, they neared the complex's presumed central command center, the most likely location to find Thorn. And there, at the end of another corridor, they saw it. Another massive armored door, appearing even more formidable than the main entrance. It was sealed tight, but from behind it came faint, intermittent sounds, like muffled sobbing or incoherent muttering. "Someone's in there," Bravo stated flatly. Charlie, wasting no time, interfaced with the door's electronic lock. This time the system was active and responsive to his intrusion attempts. After 20 tense seconds, a click echoed, and the door slid silently aside. Behind the massive armored door lay a relatively small room, apparently serving as Dr. Thorne's private office or control center. Several monitors on the walls showed static or were dark. The central control console was partially smashed, papers and broken equipment scattered everywhere. In the far corner, huddled beneath a heavy metal desk, sat a man. He wore a white lab coat, torn in places and stained with something dark like blood. The man trembled violently, eyes wide with terror, hands clutching his head as he whimpered softly. When the Ghost 6 operators entered, weapons leveled, he flinched and pressed himself further against the wall. It was Dr. Elias Thorne. He looked gaunt, terrified half to death, possibly injured. Fresh scratches were visible on his face and hands. "Don't shoot. Please don't shoot." Thorne rasped, raising trembling hands. His voice cracked. He stammered and kept glancing fearfully towards the door, as if expecting his nightmares to burst in at any moment. Gradually, prompted by Alpha's calm but firm questioning, Thorne began to relay his version of events. He claimed he'd been abducted years ago by a powerful shadow organization, hinting at either a corporate consortium or a clandestine government agency interested in his genetic research. They brought him to this isolated facility and forced him to work on Project Cerberus, threatening his family back in Europe. The security detail, professional mercenaries, were assigned less for his protection and more for control and coercion. A few hours ago, according to Thorne, a catastrophic failure occurred in the primary containment system for the lab specimens. The creatures, dogmen, he called them with a shudder, broke loose. They were incredibly strong, fast, and aggressive. The guards tried to stop them but were overwhelmed and slaughtered in minutes. He himself had barely survived, managing to reach his office and barricade himself inside, activating the emergency door lockdown protocols. Thorne tearfully pleaded with the operators to rescue him. He insisted he was the only one who fully understood the creature's nature, their physiology, and potentially their weaknesses. He claimed that without his knowledge, stopping them would be impossible. He said he possessed a universal access keycard to the main server core, located elsewhere in the complex, which held all the data on Project Cerberus, including experiment logs, genetic markers, and possibly information on how to neutralize them. But the server room was in another wing, and the path there now led through areas swarming with the escaped dogmen. He was willing to cooperate, hand over all data, help in any way he could, just to get out of this hell alive. Alpha listened to Thorne's story, his expression unreadable behind his tactical helmet. Years of covert operations and honed intuition screamed that something was wrong. Thorne spoke too coherently, too logically for a man supposedly in shock, having just survived mortal terror. Why had a heavily armed professional security force been unable to protect their key asset or even hold out longer? Why was he, an unarmed scientist, the sole survivor of the massacre? Alpha quickly scanned the room. No signs of struggle. Equipment, apart from the console, looked untouched. His desk was orderly, instruments neatly arranged. Everything was clean and organized except for Thorne himself, who continued his performance of panic. Alpha posed several control questions regarding the specifics of the complex's security systems, the creature containment protocols, the location of key control nodes. Thorne's answers were either vague or contained clear contradictions to what they had already observed or what Charlie had extracted from the lab servers. The operators exchanged brief glances via their helmet displays, communicating their doubts wordlessly. The dilemma was stark. On one hand, their orders were clear. Capture or eliminate Thorne and secure the data. They currently had the opportunity to fulfill at least the first part. On the other hand, Thorne, despite the suspicion, might genuinely hold the key to their survival and the mission's overall success. He was the only potential source of intel on the enemy that had already cost them hours of tense maneuvering and induced genuine horror. And there was no time for lengthy deliberation. Muffled thuds and scraping sounds from beyond the armored door grew louder, more insistent. The dogmen had clearly detected their presence and were trying to reach Thorne. Or them. Alpha made a rapid decision. The risk was high either way. Accepting his narrative for now, he transmitted over the internal net, extracting the scientist. He comes with us to the main exit. Delta, rig several remote charges to block passages behind us as we withdraw. Foxtrot, link up with us, take point. Bravo, your rear guard, keep the scientist close. Moving to main exit, route adjusted based on situation. Echo, first chance you get, discreetly obtain a DNA sample from Thorne blood, saliva, hair for later analysis, if we make it out. He turned to Thorne. Doctor, you're coming with us. Stay in the middle of the formation and follow all commands without hesitation. Your chance of survival is us. Understood?" Thorn nodded rapidly, the mask of terror still fixed on his face. The team moved out of the office, forming up in combat order, escorting Thorn in the center under Bravo's watchful eye. The scientist continued muttering about the horrors he'd witnessed, the dogman's incredible strength and ferocity, the danger of moving through the complex. But now, as Alpha watched him more closely, he saw something else flickering in Thorn's eyes beneath the fear. Something cold, calculating, perhaps even anticipatory. A strange expression for a man who had narrowly escaped death and remained in mortal peril. Alpha's suspicion solidified. He felt they weren't escorting a terrified scientist, but a wolf in sheep's clothing. They hadn't covered 100 yards down the main corridor when the nightmare erupted from all sides. Motion trackers on the operator's tactical displays suddenly lit up with dozens of red icons signifying rapidly approaching hostile contacts. From gaping holes in the ceiling ventilation shafts, from the dark openings of side service corridors, from the gloom ahead and behind where the rear guard had just been looking, they emerged. The dogmen. The sight was even more horrific than the indirect evidence and Thorn's descriptions had suggested. They were grotesque, monstrous hybrids of human and some large predator, perhaps wolf or mastiff. Standing 7, some even 8 feet tall, they were massive, rippling with unnaturally developed muscles beneath coats of coarse, matted, dark fur. They moved with terrifying speed and agility, utilizing both their hind legs and all fours, their movements jerky, bestial. Distorted canine muzzles with elongated jaws revealed multiple rows of razor-sharp fangs dripping thick saliva. Deep-set eyes beneath heavy brow ridges glowed with an unhealthy yellow or red light in the corridor's gloom, filled with primal fury. Long, thick claws on powerful forelimbs scraped against the metal floor, leaving deep gouges. The creatures emitted low, menacing growls, interspersed with strange clicking sounds, occasionally rising into soul-chilling, drawn-out howls that froze the blood. The ghost's reaction was instantaneous, honed to automaticity by hundreds of hours of training. Contact. Foxtrot's shout echoed in their headsets from the point position. The team immediately opened fire. The roar of the .300 blackout carbines, amplified by the confined space of the corridor, merged into a continuous deafening din. Bullets found their marks, staggering the creatures, knocking them back, but the effect wasn't what they'd expected. The creatures displayed incredible resilience and an almost complete lack of reaction to pain. Some, taking multiple hits to the torso, merely stumbled for a moment before resuming their charge with renewed snarls. Aim for the head and spine. Only way. Alpha yelled over the comms. Don't let them close. Don't let them surround us. Delta, suppressive fire, left flank. Delta, wielding the light machine gun, immediately unleashed a torrent of fire at a group of dogmen attempting to flank them from a side corridor to the left. The long burst from the FN Evolus literally tore one of the monsters in half, splattering its remains against the wall. But in that same instant, 2 other creatures, capitalizing on the machine gunner's focus on the left, attacked from his right, bursting from a service hatch he couldn't cover. One launched itself in a lightning-fast leap, clamping its steel-trapped jaws onto his right leg, crushing bone and sinew. The second vaulted onto his back, sinking claws into his shoulders and neck. Delta screamed in pain and fury. realizing he was doomed and his comrades couldn't reach him in time. He did the last thing he could. Before the monstrous fangs closed on his throat, he managed to thumb the detonator for one of the powerful C4 charges he'd previously set on a support pillar behind him. A massive explosion rocked the entire complex. A fireball and shockwave obliterated everything nearby. A section of the corridor ceiling and walls collapsed, burying Delta's body, the two attacking dogmen, and several other creatures under tons of concrete and steel. The blast saved the rest of the team from immediate annihilation by superior numbers, but it also cut off their primary escape route, choking the corridor with impassable debris. The fight instantly devolved into a desperate, chaotic close-quarters battle. The team was forced to fall back into side rooms, labs, storage areas, technical closets, using doorways as choke points. The dogmen pursued relentlessly, demonstrating not only brute strength but also cunning animalistic tactics. They smashed through thin interior walls, battered down steel doors with shoulder rams or clawed strikes, and utilized ventilation shafts for sudden attacks from above or behind. Bravo, armed with his Benelli M4, fought with cold fury, meeting creatures attempting to breach their temporary shelters with devastating point-blank blasts of buckshot. Each shot shredded heads and torsos, painting the walls with gore, but his shotgun ammo dwindled rapidly. The remaining operators employed every tactical tool available. M84 stun grenades tossed into enemy clusters bought precious seconds of disorientation. The creatures recoiled, clawing at their eyes, shrieking, allowing the team to reposition or land aimed shots. Charlie, still working his tablet even under fire, tried to activate the sector's fire suppression systems, hoping to flood the area with halon or CO2 to slow or neutralize the creatures. But most systems were damaged during the earlier massacre or offline. During the withdrawal from another wrecked laboratory, tragedy struck again. Foxtrot, covering the team's rear, clearing the last corner before exiting into a corridor, was suddenly snatched by an enormous clawed hand that shot out from the darkness of an opposing doorway. The creature had evidently lain in ambush waiting. Foxtrot only had time to yell a brief warning over the radio, "Contact rear," and empty his FN-57 pistol into the face of the monster grappling him before it dragged him with incredible force into the corridor's darkness. His teammates heard only the brief sounds of a furious struggle, snarls, the rip of fabric, and then an abrupt silence, more terrifying than any scream. Another operator lost. The team was taking heavy losses, ammunition running critically low. Echo and Bravo had sustained minor wounds, claw slashes. Alpha knew they couldn't hold out like this for long. The dogmen were too numerous, too strong, too resistant to their weapons. The only chance left was to break through to the complex's central control room, which Thorne claimed had reinforced defenses and could serve as a temporary sanctuary. Move to central control. Break contact. All units on me, he commanded. Prodded by Bravo, Dr. Thorne followed, and now not a trace of his earlier terror remained on his face. Instead, a strange, unhealthy fire burned in his eyes, a mixture of fear, excitement, and morbid curiosity. He watched the clash between his children and the elite soldiers as if observing a fascinating experiment. The survivors, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Echo, and Dr. Thorne, now trembling with excitement rather than fear, fought their way through corridors transformed into a deadly maze of blood, debris, and shadows. The dogmen no longer attacked chaotically. They now moved with coordination, attacking in waves from multiple directions, employing a primitive but terrifyingly effective pack-hunting tactic. Some drove the group forward along the main corridor, while others emerged from side passages, and still others attempted attacks from above through ventilation grates. It became chillingly clear the creatures were coordinating, perhaps obeying some unseen leader or hive mind. This made them even more dangerous. Every corner could hide an ambush. Every shadow concealed death. Approaching the sector containing the main server room according to the schematics, the team ran into another ferocious assault. While Alpha, Bravo, and Echo held back the onslaught from the main corridor, Charlie attempted a rapid hack of the server room's armored door lock. He still hoped to find a way to stop the monsters, perhaps by triggering a self-destruct sequence or an emergency sterilization protocol, or at least transmit a distress signal to the outside world, bypassing the comms jamming. He had almost cracked the lock when the wall beside him suddenly exploded inward in a shower of concrete dust and debris. A massive dogman smashed through the partition as if it were paper and lunged at the technician. Charlie, despite the surprise attack, reacted instantly. He spun and fired his HK-416 carbine almost point blank. The .300 blackout rounds slammed into the monster's chest and head, throwing it back. The creature collapsed, dead. But in the same instant, the razor-sharp claws of the monster's other forelimb raked across Charlie's chest and abdomen, tearing through his body armor and inflicting deep, ragged wounds. He crumpled to his knees, blood pooling around him, his tablet slipping from his weakening grasp. Echo rushed to his side, attempting first aid, but the injuries were too severe. Charlie was dying. Gathering his last strength, he looked up at Alpha, who had reached him and held out a small data chip. Data. Cerberus, partially. Recovered. He whispered, his eyes closing for the last time. Echo worked feverishly on Charlie's wounds, trying to staunch the bleeding, while simultaneously firing his sidearm at a fresh wave of dogmen pouring through the breach in the wall and from the corridor. One creature managed to get close enough, its clawed paw slashing Echo's left shoulder open to the bone. The pain was excruciating, but Echo merely gritted his teeth. He jammed an auto-injector of stimulant and potent painkiller into his thigh, switched his pistol to his right hand, and continued firing, shouting instructions to the wounded Bravo, who had also taken glancing claw wounds to his leg, painful but not deep, on how to apply a tourniquet and use the hemostatic agent from his IFAK. The reality of the firefight dissolved into a bloody chaos where survival instinct and professional skill warred with pain, fury, and despair. Retreating further down a narrow service tunnel that Thorne claimed was a shortcut to the central control room, the remnants of the team walked into another ambush. From a grate in the ceiling, a huge dogman dropped directly onto Echo's back. The medic, despite his grievously wounded shoulder, reacted instantly. He twisted away from the initial blow and drove his Strider combat knife up to the hilt into the creature's eye socket. The monster howled in agony, but in the same instant, a second dogman, bursting from a side passage in the tunnel, seized Echo by his injured arm and legs and dragged him with incredible force down into the darkness of the side passage. The last things Alpha and Bravo heard were Echo's short, furious cry, the sickening crunch of breaking bones, and then a wet, slurping snarl. Now only two remained, Alpha and the heavily wounded Bravo, who limped, leaning on his carbine. And with them, Thorn, whose presence felt increasingly sinister. Their ammunition was nearly exhausted, a couple of magazines each for their carbines and pistols. Pursued closely by the snarling pack, they finally reached their objective, a massive circular door, presumably leading to the complex's central control room. The door was closed, but looked incredibly strong. Bravo stopped at the door, breathing heavily. He glanced down at his injured leg, then at Alpha. "I'll hold them here," he said firmly. "Not getting far anyway. You need to get him. And the data. Out." He nodded towards Thorn and Charlie's data chip, which Alpha now clenched in his hand. "Is that an order, Alpha?" Alpha asked, though he knew the answer. "No, it's my choice," Bravo replied, checking the last magazine in his carbine. Alpha knew arguing was futile. He grabbed Thorn's arm and shoved him towards the door control panel. "Open it." Thorn, surprisingly quickly, punched in a code, and the massive door began to grind open. Bravo turned to face the tunnel from which their pursuers were already charging. He wedged the door partially open, leaving just enough space for Alpha and Thorn to squeeze through. Creating a perfect bottleneck, Bravo met the first wave of dogmen with furious carbine fire. He fought like a cornered berserker, his shots finding their marks, creatures falling one after another. But there were too many. When the carbine ran dry, he drew his pistol. His last words, coming through Alpha's earpiece as he dragged the now resisting Thorn into the control room, were cut off by snarls and impacts. "Alpha, Thorn, he's not what he seems." Ah. The comlink died amidst the sounds of tearing flesh and triumphant growls. Hauling Thorn inside, Alpha slammed his remaining strength against the close button on the interior control panel. With a heavy thud and grinding screech, the massive portal sealed, cutting off the control room from the corridor where the last of his brothers in arms had just fallen. He slumped against the cold steel of the door, fighting for breath. He was wounded, shrapnel from Delta's blast still embedded in his left leg, a deep claw gash bleeding freely on his right side from the last firefight. Ammo was critically low, one partial magazine in his MCX Spear carbine, a couple for his Glock 19 pistol. He was alone, trapped, with a scientist who, according to Bravo's last words, might not be their salvation, but the true architect of this nightmare. Inside the central control room, a relative quiet descended. The hum of ventilation was louder here, but it only emphasized the absence of other sounds, save for the muffled thuds and claw scrapes from outside. The dogmen apparently testing the massive door now separated from their creator. Alpha slowly sank to the floor, leaning his back against the cold steel, trying to assess the situation. The room was large, circular, with a high ceiling. Banks of monitors lined the walls, most dark or shattered. A massive console dominated the center, covered in buttons, levers, and indicators. Detailed schematics of the complex hung on intact sections of the wall, showing sector layouts, life support systems, and evacuation routes that were now useless. He tried his comm unit, attempting to reach the handler or even the OP where Foxtrot and Echo should have been. Futile. No signal. Comms were being jammed from within the complex. They were completely cut off. Alpha retrieved the remnants of his IFAK, cleaned the gash on his side with antiseptic, and applied a pressure dressing. His leg throbbed. The shrapnel needed removal, but that wasn't an option now. He reloaded his carbine with the last magazine, checked his pistol. Every round had to count. And then he noticed the change in Dr. Thorne. The scientist was no longer trembling with fear or excitement. He stood calmly in the center of the room, brushing dust from his lab coat. A strange, detached, almost bored expression settled on his face. He walked over to one of the few functioning monitors on the central console and began typing rapidly, his fingers moving confidently over the keys. Then Thorne turned to Alpha and spoke. His voice was calm, devoid of emotion, almost lecturing, as if addressing an inept student. "Impressive, Captain. Quite impressive. I must admit your unit exceeded my most optimistic projections." He began to pace slowly around the wounded operator. "You fought with a tenacity worthy of a better cause, but you never grasped the true purpose of my work. Project Cerberus isn't merely about creating biological weapons, as you likely assumed. It's something far greater. The creation of a higher life form, the perfect predator, inheriting the best of both worlds. Human intelligence, cunning and adaptability, married to the primal instincts, strength, and ferocity of the beast." He stopped before a dark monitor and gestured vaguely. "Humanity has disappointed me, Captain. Mired in weakness, corruption, petty squabbles. It's driving this planet to ruin. My children," he nodded towards the scraping sound at the door, "are the next stage of evolution. They will cleanse this world, establish a new order, the order of strength and instinct." Alpha listened to the mad monologue, an icy dread gripping his heart. The pieces clicked into place. The slaughtered guards, the convenient containment failure, the sole surviving scientist, Bravo's final warning. "They weren't breaking out of control at all, Captain," Thorne said with a wry smirk, catching the flicker of understanding in Alpha's eyes. "They were following my orders. A simple, necessary personnel purge. My previous colleagues and guards grew too curious, started asking inconvenient questions, attempted to contact the outside world. The information leak had to be contained." He spread his hands. "And then field testing was required. To validate my creations under real combat conditions against truly formidable opposition. So I initiated the distress signal myself, using old access codes from my former employers, feeding your handler disinformation about bioweapon development. I knew they'd send the best. I wasn't mistaken." The scraping outside the door abruptly stopped. Thorne walked to the console and pressed several buttons. Some of the dead monitors flickered to life, displaying feeds from internal cameras positioned in the corridor just outside the control room. Dozens of dogmen sat or stood perfectly still. Their earlier fury vanished. They stared at the massive door, patiently awaiting their master's command. One of them, the largest, the Pax Alpha, cautiously nudged its grotesque muzzle into a tear previously clawed into the door's metal, looking directly at Thorne with an expression of almost canine loyalty and submission. Alpha understood everything. Their entire contract, the whole operation, had been a setup from the start. They weren't hired to neutralize a threat. They were hired as test subjects, as the final, most challenging trial for Thorne's creations. Had the handler been duped by this madman? Or was Thorne the handler, pulling the strings from his isolated lab? It didn't matter anymore. The crushing weight of total betrayal and absolute hopelessness crashed down on him. He had lost his entire team fighting monsters, only so their creator could evaluate their combat effectiveness. Rage warred with despair. He struggled to lift his carbine, aiming at Thorn, but his strength was failing. His wounds throbbed, his vision swam from blood loss and exhaustion. "Your unit demonstrated exceptional combat prowess, Captain," Thorn continued in his calm voice, slowly circling the grievously wounded Alpha. "Incredible intelligence, flawless tactics, an unbending will to survive. You are the quintessence of what humanity could achieve, were it not for its inherent weaknesses. You possess excellent genetic material." He stopped directly in front of Alpha, a mad glint of triumph in his eyes. "Which is precisely why you will be the finest, most valuable acquisition for my new pack, Captain. You will become my Alpha." With those words, Thorn produced a large metal syringe from his lab coat pocket, filled with a murky, greenish liquid. The subjugation serum mentioned in Charlie's files, or something worse, a transformation serum. Alpha knew his sentence was being passed. Thorn made a subtle gesture towards the door. With a soft hiss of pneumatics, the massive steel portal to the control room began to slide open again. The scientist had unlocked it from the console. Dark silhouettes of the dogmen filled the opening. There were at least a dozen. They didn't charge in as before. Instead, they entered slowly, methodically, almost ritually, and began to encircle the wounded Alpha, cutting off any possible path of retreat or maneuver. Their heavy breathing and low growls filled the room. Yellow and red eyes burned with an unhealthy light in the dimness, thick saliva dripping from bared fangs. They moved with the chilling confidence of predators cornering their prey, patiently awaiting the command of their creator, their god. Alpha, gathering the last shreds of his will and strength, made a desperate final stand. He lunged forward, trying to bring his carbine to bear on Thorn while he was still within reach. But one of the closest dogmen reacted with blinding speed. A powerful swipe of a clawed paw struck the weapon, knocking the MCX spear from Alpha's weakened grasp and sending it skittering across the floor. Before he could even reach for the Glock 19 holstered on his thigh, another monster repeated the maneuver, stripping him of his last means of defense. Alpha was left standing in the center of the room, unarmed, heavily wounded, surrounded by a pack of abominations, facing his executioner and his nightmarish progeny. The end was inevitable. Thorn approached slowly, syringe held ready. A triumphant, predatory smile played on his lips. "Don't worry, Captain," he said, in an almost soothing tone that sounded even more horrific under the circumstances. "The process will be nearly painless. Well, perhaps a slight burning sensation initially. It's merely a minor restructuring of your organism at the cellular level. The most wonderful part is, you'll retain your mind, your unique skills, your memories, but your instincts, your priorities will shift dramatically. You will gain true strength, feel true freedom, the freedom of the apex predator. You will lead them." He gestured to the surrounding dogmen who stood frozen in anticipation. "You will be their pack leader, under my careful scientific guidance, of course." A storm of emotions raged in Alpha's eyes. Primal terror of the impending transformation, burning hatred for this madman, the desperate, futile resistance of a mind refusing to accept such a fate. He understood he faced something worse than death. Becoming one of these monsters, losing his identity, becoming a slave to this lunatic scientist, a tool in his hands. He tried to wrench free, to push Thorn away, but his wounds and critical fatigue betrayed him. The two nearest dogmen instantly seized his arms with their powerful paws, holding him fast with inhuman strength. Their claws dug into his flesh through his tactical gear. He was completely immobilized. Thorn moved in close. His eyes blazed with triumph. With a satisfied, almost voluptuous smile, he pressed the needle of the syringe against Alpha's neck, finding the pulsing carotid artery. In one smooth motion, he slid the needle in and depressed the plunger. The thick, greenish fluid began to flow into the operator's vein. The first sensation was intense burning, then a wave of icy coldness spreading rapidly through his body from the injection site. And then came an overwhelming surge of pain and disorientation. The world before Alpha's eyes began to blur, distort, lose focus. Sounds became muffled and distant. The perspective slowly tightens on Alpha's face. His features begin to tremble, contort, as if something is moving beneath the skin. His eyes flood with blood, the pupils narrowing unnaturally, becoming vertical slits like a reptile's. The sickening wet crunch of bones breaking and resetting echoes softly. His body starts to writhe unnaturally, elongating, growing in size visibly. He tries to scream, but only a choked gasp escapes his throat, quickly morphing into an inhuman, drawn-out howl, a howl of unbearable agony, primal fury, and terrifying new birth. Thorn steps back a few paces, arms crossed. He observes the transformation of his new Alpha with an expression of profound scientific interest and undisguised triumph. The dogmen surrounding the figure convulsing on the floor begin to growl softly, baring their teeth, as if both welcoming and acknowledging the arrival of a new, incredibly powerful member of their pack. The view slowly pulls back, revealing the entire control room bathed in the dim, sickly light of the emergency lamps. In the center of the room, in a pool of his own blood, the last surviving operator of the elite Ghost 6 unit twists and changes, surrounded by his future packmates and their insane creator father.